What's up, YouTube? I am the Vanilla Nerd, and today I want to talk about Captain America Civil War. Now, I haven't watched this movie recently, so I'm not going to do a full in-depth review, but it's been on my mind, and I remember it well enough to talk about it. So this is going to be more of a high overview, broad strokes. What did I like about this film? What did I not like about it? Rather than an in-depth deep dive into the specific characters and scenes that I liked from the movie. Although I might get into some of the specifics. I don't know. We'll kind of see where it goes. Anywho, spoiler warning for this movie, of course, from start to finish, but also I'll be talking about Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame, because this movie has a big impact on both of those movies, which I'm excited to talk about, as well as a general spoiler warning for the first three phases of the MCU, where this movie affects the most characters and stuff like that. So, anyway, you've been warned. Let's get into what I have to say. Okay, so as the title implies, I think this movie is a flawed masterpiece, and I absolutely love that phrase because it perfectly encapsulates how I feel about this film. I remember when I first watched this movie, while I did enjoy it a lot, I kind of came out of the theater a little disheartened because I saw the flaws of the film, and it really bothered me how weak some of the aspects of the film were, which ended up giving me kind of a sour taste in my mouth. However, as I've come to accept those flaws and as I've rewatched this movie many, many times, I've realized just how much I like it. I really, really enjoy Civil War. It has gotten better with every rewatching, which is not surprising considering that my first one was so disappointing. But it's just a really, really good film. And I think with the context of Avengers Infinity War and Endgame, it makes it even better. So I want to talk about the flaws, but also the wins of this movie, and talk about how they're interrelated, and yet they make this movie a masterpiece. So I'm excited to talk about that. Let's start off with the flaws, because I want to end on a win. Now, the first flaw that I take issue with this film is with Vision and how underutilized he is, which is really unfortunate because he's a really cool character. But at virtually any point in this movie, you can ask yourself, where's Vision? And if he's not on screen, it's probably a plot hole, which is really unfortunate. And this is for a number of reasons, but let's take the first scene, right? Captain America and the rest of the Avengers are trying to stop Crossbones from stealing some disease and wreaking havoc and terror on the world. Great, but where's Vision? Why is he not there helping the Avengers? I get that Tony Stark is giving some speech at MIT and is doing some humanitarian work and giving back to the world in a positive way, and that's great. And Rhodey, he's a colonel, he has a life. I get it. But Vision is an android. He doesn't have a whole lot of friends outside of the Avengers. He doesn't have a whole lot of reason not to be there to help stop Crossbones. And I feel like he absolutely would have been a game changer and potentially averted the crisis that Wanda accidentally caused to kickstart this whole movie, which is unfortunate. And this isn't even addressing the elephant in the room, which is the airport battle. Like, during that battle, he doesn't take out any of Captain America's buddies. He just doesn't, which is surprising because 5 out of the 6 members of Captain America's team can't stop him. Like, Wanda's the only one who can really do it. Technically, maybe the Falcon can outfly him for a bit, and Hawkeye's electric arrows showed to do something against him, so maybe there's something there. But in all honesty, as Avengers 2 stated, he's more powerful than any of the Avengers, probably all of them combined, which is not really that big of a lie. He's made out of vibranium, he can shoot lasers from his forehead, and he can phase through things. It's really hard to stop this guy. And yet he makes next to no impact on the outcome of the airport battle, which is surprising. I mean, technically he takes out Rhodey's arc reactor accidentally, causing Rhodey to fall, be paralyzed, and effectively ending the fight for everyone involved. So he does make an impact that way. But still, Vision is incredibly underutilized in Captain America Civil War, and it's very unfortunate. And unfortunately, it's something that he goes on to be underutilized in Infinity War. The only good movie with him in it was Avengers 2. I really liked how they used him there. But in this movie and in Infinity War, yeah, he was underutilized. But moving on to our first win, it's kind of ironic, but in all honesty, Captain America Civil War is a really good team-up movie, with the exception of Vision. Like, the rest of the movie is absolutely fantastic in how it balances its characters. Like, nowhere is that more clear than that airport scene. You have 12 named superheroes all in a fight together. They all get a chance to shine. They all get a chance to show off their powers. It even introduces Black Panther and Spider-Man, and we get to see all of their powers shown off. I mean, I know Black Panther already had a few cool moments earlier in the movie, but still, the airport battle was amazing. And it absolutely proved to me that the MCU's method of just putting more and more characters in a movie can work if you have the right directors and writers behind the scenes. They were, not only did they show off these cool characters' abilities and powers, but they were also true to the characters. All of the interactions were funny. All the interactions are exactly how these characters would react and would interact with one another. It just worked so well. And don't get me wrong, Vision is still underutilized. I'll still harp on that. But the rest of the characters are all utilized to perfection. You see what I mean by a flawed masterpiece? They have a glaring flaw in Vision, but the rest of the characters are masterfully depicted on screen. And it's why I trust the Russo brothers and their writing partners, Christopher Marcus and Stephen McFeely, who wrote this movie and Captain America 2 and Infinity War and Avengers Endgame. All four of those guys worked on all four of those movies and produced some of the best films in the MCU. And it's all started here, in my opinion, with Captain America Civil War. Yes, technically it started with Captain America 2, but really Civil War is what proved they could handle all of the Avengers. You could throw all of these characters together and it works. It really does. And that is why Captain America Civil War is a masterpiece, and that's a huge win for this movie. Moving on to the next big flaw, and that is Zemo's plan. Because ultimately, Zemo's plan is full of plot conveniences, plot contrivances, and really it just works on luck and a prayer. And because the movie says it's going to work. There are many issues you could point out with it, but I'll bring up two. Number one is when he infiltrates the UN as some therapist and is able to get a one-on-one meeting with Bucky. That's a pretty important part of his plan, and yet no one was able to recognize that he didn't look like the actual therapist dude. I mean, the real therapist was kind of a heavier set gentleman, and Zemo's kind of slimmer. I'm surprised that just wasn't a giveaway, but hey, here we are. I guess he hacked the computers and no one had ever met this guy before. For that matter, how did he know who the therapist was going to be? Yeah, you see how this plan begins to unravel. But the other big problem with Zemo's plan is that he gets to the Russian base. He's hiding out there. He's got the clip ready to go of Winter Soldier killing Tony's parents. But how does he know that Iron Man is going to show up at the same time as Captain America and the Winter Soldier? He doesn't. Because Captain America and the Winter Soldier leave in the Quinjet immediately following the airport battle. Tony gets delayed by taking Rhodey to the hospital, which he absolutely should do, and then going to the raft to get information, which, not for nothing, but the raft is in the middle of the ocean, and Siberia is in the largest country on Earth by land. Russia. I mean, we're not 100% sure it's Siberia, wherever this secret Russian base is, but it's somewhere. Right? It's somewhere in the middle of Russia. So it's going to take Tony a long time to get there from wherever he's at in the ocean. And they just happen to show up at the same time. That's a big problem that Zemo has to deal with. Now, admittedly, Zemo is in some sort of strong room that he claims they would really struggle to break into. And admittedly, Captain America's shield and Bucky's banana clip gun probably wouldn't be able to get through it that easily without the extra armaments of Iron Man's armor. But still, I think Zemo's plan is very tenuous at best and is a pretty big flaw of this movie, all things considered. At least the actual logistics of it. But speaking of a win, let's talk about Zemo's plan and the complexity of this plot from the thematic perspective, which is that I really like Zemo's plan and his desire to turn the Avengers against each other. That's brilliant. I think that's really, really smart, and it works really, really well for this movie. Because the plot of this film, which is what I really want to talk about, is absolutely fantastic. It is such a good win for this movie. It is complex, it is engaging, it is compelling. It has me on the edge of my seat the entire way through. It should be noted that until the very last act of this movie, we don't know Zemo's ultimate plan. We know he's driven. We know he wants to hurt the Avengers a little bit, but we don't know how, right? We think it's the super soldier serum. We think it's the super soldiers trapped up in the secret Russian base, but ultimately we find out he just wanted to turn the Avengers against each other, and it's brilliant. Yes, it's flawed, as I just talked about, but I would rather have a complex, flawed plot than a paint by numbers bland plot that's airtight. Case in point, compare Captain America Civil War to Captain America the First Avenger. Captain America the First Avenger has a pretty good plot, logistically speaking. Obviously, the end is not very airtight. The fact that he has to put the plane down into the water doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but I've already addressed that in my review of the First Avenger. But my thing with the First Avenger is that most of that plot is all based around Captain America's choices. He chooses to keep going to the recruitment offices. He chooses to get the super soldier serum. He chooses not to be a lab rat, but instead to join the USO tour. He chooses to go save his friend Bucky when he could choose not to. And it's a bunch of choices that he builds. So it's really not built around the plot entirely, but the plot is very bland. It's very paint by numbers. There's an evil villain who wants to take over the world. He has a scientist underling who helps him accomplish that. He ignores the scientist underling more often than he listens to him, so that way he can fulfill his ultimate vision of ultimate power. It's a very bland, boring plot. And I would take the plot of Captain America any day. Yes, it has plot holes, as I just discussed, with Zemo's plan and with other things, but it's really, really well done. And really, really interesting. And so I love the plot of Captain America Civil War. And I love Civil War more than I like the First Avenger. Although I still love First Avenger. Because what I absolutely love about the plot of Captain America Civil War is that it perfectly showcases both sides of the argument. You have to understand, I went into this movie completely biased towards Captain America. Not only is he my favorite superhero, but also I agreed with his point of view. I don't think the superheroes should be governed by a corrupt and imperfect government. However, Tony does. And so I was expecting to hate on Tony, to not agree with him whatsoever. But this movie showed me the benefits of Tony's way of thinking, as well as the detriments of Captain America's. And so by the end of this film, I came away with agreeing with both sides of the argument. They both had good reasons for what they were doing. And I absolutely love that about this film. Because so many other Versus movies have the characters come together at the end, agree on a common viewpoint, and fight some big bad evil guy that's larger than themselves, which is fine. It works for some of those movies, but not this movie. This movie kept the heroes separate. They never agreed. There were 3 big major fights between the superheroes. Captain America is fighting Bucky as much as he's fighting Black Panther in the chase through Germany and the traffic. Excellent. Absolutely excellent. The airport scene. Famous, of course. But at the end, do the heroes team up and fight the 5 super soldiers? No. Captain America and Bucky have to fight Iron Man, and it's this brutal, gritty, fist-on-fist fight, which is just absolutely amazing. And at the end of the movie, the thing that absolutely sold me on Tony's way of thinking was Rhodey's testimony. He's fallen down after going through physical therapy, right? He's on the ground and he talks about how he flew all these missions and any one of them could have been his last. And he doesn't really mind that this one was the one that caused him to be paralyzed. And he tells Tony, I would do it all over again because the accords are needed. And I love that. It's so powerful and it makes me see and understand Iron Man's point of view. The problem with this is, and here's where the next fault comes in, and the last one I'll talk about, is that Rhodey immediately reneges on this in the next movie. In Avengers Infinity War, he completely disobeys the orders of Ross and decides to join up with Captain America in protecting Vision and trying to save the world from Thanos, which is fine. And if you want to be nice to the MCU, we can talk about how Avengers Infinity War takes place two years after Civil War. So, maybe after 2 years of putting up with Ross and his, ego and all of that, he's done with it. But still, the legacy of this film, despite showing off both sides really well, most characters end up siding with Captain America, right? Because in this movie alone, 2 characters defect from Iron Man's side and join Captain America. Both Black Widow and Black Panther end up becoming friends with him, right? Like in the post-credit scene, Captain America goes to Black Panther and is like, hey, can you help out my friend Bucky? And Black Panther's like, yeah, 100%. Now, I stand by this because I love Captain America and Black Panther's friendship. They should absolutely be best friends and, recognize a kindred spirit in each other, both being very honorable men who are going to do good for the sake of good. But it still is kind of funny that, Black Panther switches sides, despite being for the Sokovia Accords earlier in this film. Same thing with Black Widow. But Black Widow I like a little bit more than Black Panther's choice because Black Widow I've always seen as the perfect in-between Captain America and Tony Stark. She understands both sides, but she chooses Captain America in the end. And outside of this film, in Infinity War, 2 others defect to Captain America's side. We already talked about Rhodey ignoring Ross and joining Captain America, but Vision is also there, ignoring the Accords and sneaking off with Wanda, the love of his life, which is great, but that still is defecting to Captain America's side. Now, if we want to give the MCU the benefit of the doubt, we could say that Vision and Rhodey both still believe in the Sokovia Accords. They just recognize that there's a bigger threat at play here with a spaceship descending in New York and Vision hurt and all that stuff. But still, that's pretty weak. And ultimately, at the end of the day, the legacy of Captain America, despite showing off both sides of the argument really well, kind of shows most of the MCU heroes siding with Captain America and his belief. Now, admittedly, some people might not think this is that big of a flaw of Captain America Civil War. Lots of versus movies have a bias towards one of the sides of the argument or the other. And that's fair, that's valid, but it is a flaw that I take with this film, that more of the character side with Captain America. And it's actually one I like because, as I said previously, I like Captain America and I like his belief system. So I'm glad that more superheroes tend to agree with Captain America and that at the end of the MCU, or at least at the end of the first 3 phases, it's kind of shown that Captain America's way of thinking was probably the right one. But we'll see. Anyways, in another bit of irony, the next win that I want to talk about is the fact that this movie's impact on the larger MCU is an absolute masterpiece. I know I just talked about the legacy being kind of a problem, but I want to talk now more about the impact. And I guess what I'm trying to say is that the fact that the Avengers are split up at the end of this movie causes big problems in the next Avengers movie, right? Because I remember when this movie ended, a lot of people were frustrated because they're like, oh, well, everything's hunky-dory because Cap left Tony the little cell phone to contact him, and it's not even going to be a problem for the next movie. But hey, shocker, it was a problem for the next movie, right? Not only was Tony really hesitant to call Captain America when he absolutely should have, but furthermore, there's the problem that because Vision was forced to sneak off with Wanda in these clandestine meetings, he and Wanda were able to be ambushed all by themselves. If the Avengers were together and they were all at Avengers Campus or Avengers Mansion or whatever, right, then they wouldn't have been able to be ambushed, at least not nearly as easily. And the Avengers could have put up a united front against Thanos and his minions. But instead, because the Avengers were separated, it made it really easy for Thanos to come in and win against them, which is a big, big problem. And I absolutely love that Captain America has this kind of an impact on the MCU. But more than the effect that Captain America Civil War had on the next Avengers movie, I love the impact this movie had on the arcs for Captain America and Iron Man. Because here in this movie is where their paths cross, right? At the start of the MCU, Iron Man is against authority and does his own thing. At the beginning of the MCU, Captain America is all for authority and following orders. But in this movie, after the events of Captain America 2 and Avengers 2 notably, both of them are now understandably switching tactics. Captain America is against the government, and Iron Man is all for more oversight. Their motivations make sense. Their characters are dynamic. They're changing over the course of the MCU, and it's beautifully done. And their paths only continue to diverge as the MCU progresses. In Endgame, Iron Man makes that sacrifice play, willing to save all the other superheroes at the cost of his own life, where Captain America is willing to retire, to put down the shield so that he can live a proper life with Peggy. It's wonderful, it's beautiful, and it's honestly the absolute power of the MCU being able to tell this multi-movie character arc for these two characters, which is just so beautiful and a major step along that pathway. The crossing point was here appropriately in Captain America Civil War, where they're at odds with each other. So, in conclusion, Captain America Civil War is a very flawed movie. They underutilized Vision, Zemo's plan doesn't really hold up to scrutiny, and the legacy of this film is kind of tarnished slightly by the fact that most of the superheroes end up siding with Captain America anyways, despite being opposed to him in this movie. However, this movie has a lot of wins that are absolutely masterful, right? This is the first major movie to have a big team up of heroes. Yes, I know the Avengers movies had both done it previously, but this movie really felt like it was something different from even Avengers 2, where you had all of these characters. It just felt like too many, but they managed to do it and do it well. It had a complex and interesting plot that, despite its flaws, is still very entertaining, very engaging, and is wonderfully told. And finally, this movie is absolutely masterful in its impact on the MCU. The Avengers movies have consequences on the larger MCU, despite what other people would argue. And nowhere is that seen more clearly than in Captain America Civil War, when the Avengers split up and it causes major problems for future movies. I love Captain America Civil War. It is a flawed masterpiece. It is fantastic, and if you can look past those flaws, you can see an absolutely stunning and fantastic film underneath.